I had I I'm bummed that I wasn't accepted for who I was so much growing up because I made decisions and I kind of squelched things. And I do feel like there's a normal progression in some of our lives of like my brothers and sisters, like they were having in adolescence, like had girlfriends and boyfriends and they dated and like kind of figured some of that stuff out. And I didn't do any of that. And like there's some of that just would have been great to do at that point in time. So I don't know if that answers your question totally
Yeah,
of what you're getting at,
yeah,
but
absolutely.
yeah, yeah. And I can understand from where I'm at now, especially like in relation to my father, like my dad. He grew up in a time when it was very different than it is now. It wasn't even the 90s, don't ask, don't tell. This was in the 60s when, I mean, even for my uncle who was gay, like I look at that and how horrible that he was treated. So there is more acceptance, and I am pleased to see too. I see some spaces within Christianity and within churches that are being more understanding and more open too. So I find that to be heartening for myself as a gay man.
I remember I graduated high school in May of 1980, so I was a child of the 70s, 60s and 70s.
I love it.
And I remember that at some point, at that time, we called them uncles. And I'm not a genealogy expert, but come to find out they weren't my uncles, they were my cousins. So one of my cousins came out. It's somehow, some way. We heard as children, or my parents heard that Uncle Larry or Uncle, no, it was Doug. No, it wasn't Doug. Larry? I don't know. One of them. We'll say Larry. No, no, it wasn't Larry. What was his name? Oh my God, I can't even remember. Anyway, one of my quote unquote uncles, who was really a cousin, was gay, and it was kind of a thing of embarrassment. And when my grandmother was alive, she was the one she was the glue that kind of held the family together, and she's the reason why we all had family Christmases, celebrations, and it just wasn't talked about. It never came up in open conversation. It was just kind of swept under the rug,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
remember that there was a sense of embarrassment or disappointment or whatever you want to say. It was not considered normal, right? And that's the only time in my life as a child that I remember that even came up. Other than that, nobody, there was no LGBTQA plus binary blah blah blah. There was none of that, and I guess it was like you said in the '90s, maybe '80s, late '80s, early '90s, whatever, where it came out into the open and was more prevalent. And another thing that wasn't talked about was divorce. People didn't like to talk about divorce. I mean, there were a lot of things in the closet back then that stayed in the closet. And
Yes.
my parents told me and my sister, we're adopted. My parents told me and my sister this. They said, "What happens in this house stays in this house. You don't repeat it to anybody anywhere outside of that front door." Right. And so there was a very protective sort of environment where
Hmm.
you just, divorce happened. You knew people got divorced, but it just wasn't spoken about. It wasn't allowed out into the open to be dissected, discussed, opinions made, blah blah blah, right?